Let me just start off by saying hi. My name is Lucy Georgiadis. Um, some of you know me, some of you may not know me. I am the co-founder and CEO of Elevate Leadership. I have done many, many thousands of hours of coaching and training over the last 13 years. My background is in neuroscience, so I'm like really looking forward to digging into how things have really evolved in the L&D space and bringing some knowledge that I have. But I'm particularly excited, of course, to have Susie and Rajdeep join me today. And I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit more. But Susie is our Chief People Officer extraordinaire. She's built and scaled global teams, and really is the fountain of all knowledge when it comes to anything people related. She's based in Toronto. So Susie, I'll let you tell everyone a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, that was a very generous intro. Hi, everyone around the world, I guess. So my name's Susie. Basically, my background is kind of did the corporate athlete thing for probably 15 years, worked cross-functionally across like finance, ops, HR strategy. Last kind of 5 years been in tech, chief people for a couple of unicorns here in Canada. And then most recently doing the third chapter where I'm working on a boutique HR consultancy. So I work a lot, coached a lot, managed teams up to 1,000 people in my career. So this is a passion topic for me. And I've also run L&D teams, actually, like as part of my team, both like for the organization and for operations. So looking forward to the discussion and the questions. So thanks for having me.
And on to Rajeev Day. So Raj and I go back 20 something years. We were actually at college together back in the day, university for those of you in Europe. Raj actually has an MBE from the Queen, which he probably won't say, so I'm going to say, for his services to entrepreneurship across the UK. Raj started Startup Britain. He has been like an entrepreneur for 20 years or so, and he is the CEO and founder of Learnably. So I will pass over to Raj to elaborate a little further.
Thanks so much, Lucy. Great to be with you and be with you all today. So Lucy said, my name's Raj. I'm never had a proper job, so to speak. I'm a serial founder since I was 17. Started a social enterprise for school kids when I was at school, a jobs platform for university students when I was at university, and Startup Britain with the government. Lucy mentioned a national campaign to promote entrepreneurship, and then in 2017 launched Learnably. Having helped thousands of companies hire great people through my previous venture, I then turn my attention to how do you develop them? How do you ensure that you're able to attract the very best talent in a world where people want to learn and grow? And so started Learnably, which is a curated marketplace with the best professional development opportunities, connecting employees to over 200 of the world's best content providers, including Elevate, and in a fully multimodal way. And we'll tell you more about that later in the webinar.
Great, great. And then the last person that I want to introduce is Mary, who you will see in our chat box. Mary is part of the Elevate team. She's wonderful. She is there to be your champions, to track any questions, any problems. Do feel free to reach out to her directly there. So the goal of this webinar is to talk about the next generation of modern learning and development strategies to really power up a remote or hybrid workforce. How can we engage employees across time zones in a new and interesting ways to really bring them closer together so that they feel this sense of belonging and be part of a community? And we're going to discuss how we've seen L&D evolve over the past few years. We'll deep dive into some strategies that we've seen work well. And there's going to be lots from Raj and Susie. And then finally, we're going to talk about, well, how do you implement these strategies without falling into some common pitfalls that we've seen folks fall into? But first of all, I would love to see who we have joining today. So I'm going to run a really quick poll to see what roles you all do, and that will help us. Make sure that we can tailor our chat accordingly. So let me just jump into our polls here. Just take a second to pop your answers in here. Interested to see if we've got what human resources and talent folks we have. L&D folks, other functions. Interesting to see whose teams have won, and external coaches, trainers, facilitators we have. Just give you a little moment or two to add those in. then I'll share them with everybody. Got a lot of human resource talent folks, as we can imagine. Couple of coaches and trainers. Good to see you all. All right, just another 10 seconds. Amazing. Okay, here we go. All right, so here's what we have. Over half of you from HR and talent. We've got a couple of human resource teams of one. So many hats to wear that everybody has. Yes, exactly as Mary and I on the same page, so exactly the same thing at the same time. And we've got some other product functions in here as well, just at 9%. Okay, interesting. Thank you so much for that. All right, so now let's dive into what does modern really mean? What do we mean by modern L&D strategies? And Susie, I'll let you kick off with this one. What do you define this to be? So we're all on the same page.
Yeah, well, I think for me, if I think about L&D strategies, you're teaching and developing people. So you have to look at what's going on with people in the market, right? Like, first of all, how are we working? And that's really evolved, right? Like the job market where we're at. And we all know, like COVID, there's basically 1 in 2 people quit their jobs, right? And then that changed the market big time, right? Like it used to be on average, like 13% turnover rate for the whole, like all industries together on average. That's like 1 in 10 people leaving your org. Right. And now, we got up to 1 in 2 during COVID, and now we're kind of 1 in 5. So this means longer stints. 1 in 5 people turning over every year, like a 20% more or less, means that your whole organization could be new in 5 years, right? Like that changes the dynamics, right? Versus 1 in 10 years, right? So this is, I think, the foundation of like the biggest shift, I think, in just how we work and then how we learn. So stints are shorter. Also with COVID, it brought like just a different way of working. Now we're more hybrid than in person. So, gone are the days of the classroom and, my 4-day onboarding at 3M in my first job, which was amazing, right? But now I feel people would be like, oh my gosh, like, no. And, and then also there's the generational piece, right? That, if you think about the modern way of working, like a higher percentage, especially a lot of people on this call, I think would be in the startup scale up world, like high percentages. We're talking probably like 50 to 70% of any like startup scale up is, Gen Z, Gen Y, right? So digital nomads. So this is also, changing. And I would say this brings us to the present day of like what's going on. Fast turnover, shorter term in all your jobs. Like if you look at it just from yourself. And then, yeah, just like a younger group. So, and the people that consume things instantly and work really independently.
Raj, what would you add to that?
Yeah, totally agree. I think that the context has dramatically shifted. So pre-COVID, we would attribute kind of learning and development to being sitting in a classroom, and often actually being kind of synonymous with compliance training. I think they would think, oh, learning development is just, tick a box and get this done and kind of move on, or, you're onboarding. With companies, actually, 74% of companies, according to latest research, are planning to implement permanent hybrid strategies. We've been forced to rethink how we approach learning and development. It's not about just transmitting information sitting in a classroom, but really, which is typically actually just training, but actually thinking about learning, thinking about the experience people are going through, and designing new experiences for the new context that they're in. And it's not just about the transmission, it's about making sure that people, you're empowering people to be self-directed learners, which they actually are, and meeting them where they're at. And I think the status quo for too long has been very much a one size fits none model. Let's give everyone some generic e-learning access to some generic video content, and then no one engages. I think the industry norms have been if 10% of people engage, then you're winning. And actually, it's a shame if people have set the kind of barrier to be that low. Modern kind of learning strategies really meets people where they're at. It really hyper personalizes their learning experiences, meets them and provides them with what they want to learn based on how they like to learn. And the other big shift that we've seen is shifting the narrative from just kind of learning for the sake of learning to more of a skills economy, really to understand what are the skills our employees have and how are we upskilling people through the various L&D initiatives that we are doing.
Yes. Yeah. Really meeting people where they are. Love that. Really great stats from the two of you as well. Really fascinating. Really fascinating. And Cynthia, I like your point here as well, like attention spans from everyone. There is different generation, different, yeah, well, Susie's like that's zero. But we do have to think about how we engage people differently for sure. Absolutely. So we've seen it really evolve a lot over the last 5 years. Susie, do you want to elaborate there a little bit more? How have you, I know you've been really in the thick of it, seen it evolve a little bit more. And also, what do employees care about that you see that's different?
Yeah, I think that I like what Raj said, that it is really, it's people are looking at their own personal like journey, right? And I think things have really changed because of all the turnover. There's so many different impacts to this. And I think one of them is that you're starting and you're learning your job, you need just-in-time training. Like this is critical that you need it when you need it, right? And like having it beforehand, it's not as helpful. It's not, you know, sometimes actually with the Elevate has its own learning platform. And I work with people, they're like, should I just watch like 10 videos? I'm like, no, you could, but it's not as helpful as like, you know, if you're actually having like a crucial conversation to go and look like how to have a difficult conversation or how to have a career chat when that actually happens. And you know, the one thing I like focus on here in this discussion is really around managers. I work a lot with managers and they're working managers. Like it's also, we're in this kind of, we move from a growth at all cost markets to like focus on the bottom line. So because of this, you know, you have a lot of people that are new in all of their jobs, and then also the managers are working. So I think this is one of the toughest things that's going on. It's like, how do you build in the learning? So if if we think about it like holistically, I think learning is also shifting to on the job. It has to. It just has to, like, because you have to learn your job. You're new to every job, right? And you're being asked to do more jobs, right? And so like the idea of just like, you know, putting it off or something, like companies need to think about like, how do you actually do it when you need it, and short because you're busy. Yeah.
Yeah. Raj, anything you want to add in there?
No, I think this whole concept of learning in the flow of work, just in time learning and meeting them, you know, where they're at. So actually one of the most common ways of learning is jumping on YouTube, like finding a video, or in this day and age, kind of on TikTok, people are learning on other forms of learning. So I think it's having a more holistic view of learning and moving away from, you know, which I think we've been forced to from this kind of just classroom based training that we've come from, you know, back, you know, pre-COVID era.
Yeah. Yeah. And have you seen any, I'm kind of interested in examples that either of you have seen where things have kind of gone wrong recently. I've had one where a company asked for one type of training and we didn't dig in there hard enough to see, well, where were some of the cultural divides with that team? And not in a bad way, but actually half of them had a very different culture to the other half of the team and a very different way of working. And we thought we were meeting people where they are, but then found that half the room was not meeting them where they are. And now we're redoing all of that training for them this year. We're having to think very carefully about how even within a company, we're having to like segment people and make sure that we're really speaking the right language for the different audiences that we have within larger companies.
I was thinking, I was on a call this morning actually, where they were talking about just having the availability of courses, right? And someone went in and they went to HR actually and said, "Oh, this is happening on my team," and and then kind of there was, you know, time before she responded, she went back, and then they're like, "Oh, I'm good. I watched a video. I got it." Right? Like I was like, what? I was like, and maybe this is where it goes a little bit too extreme. Like sometimes, like, you know, I think we're at the point where it's very, I don't know, binary. Like either you know or don't know is kind of where people feel that they're at. So sometimes they'll go and self-serve, like go on the YouTube or watch that video or do whatever, and then they think they're equipped. So I think this is the other side of this is like, how do you right size this? We're kind of in the middle. Like you do want to do this like independent learning and get things just in time, but I think it's just like, how do you also help people connect the dots? So that just a very recent example where I just laughed as like, oh, as like some of this is learned by doing and failing a little bit too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to add, I think the biggest mistake I've seen, and I think people are definitely getting better as we're just used to now using tools like Zoom, is just shifting what they used to do offline, online, without actually thinking about the design of the delivery and thinking through the experience on the other end. Like, I think it's very different if you're sitting in a room with people around you and kind of paying attention to being on a screen for like a full, you know, a 3-hour workshop with no breaks is just really, you know, ridiculous. So really thinking about how you design the experience, ensuring more regular breaks. Screen fatigue is real. Facilitating, on like you've done here with polls and breakout rooms and things like that. I think your point around really understanding your audience is so important. I think the biggest thing and the biggest lesson for people is and the skill actually in this day and age is around empathy, and around really empathizing and understanding your audience, to be able to deliver really high impact learning experiences.
Yes, great. And we'll touch on both of those things, because I think that like design piece comes into how do we actually roll things out effectively, and the empathy piece. I think there's some more interesting things around that empathy piece that we can talk about with some of the initiatives when we get further on today too. Okay, wonderful. Well, I'd love to know from all of you on the line, that's such a British thing to say, on the call, what are your main goals for L&D initiatives this year? And we may not have like every single one in here, but I'm really interested to see what you all currently do, and if there's any extra ones you can put in the bottom. But what are the main goals of your L&D initiatives? I'll just give you a minute or two. Yeah, we're getting a lot of management leadership skills. Yep, easing the pressure. Yeah. Yeah, a lot around developing talent internally, increasing employee engagement. That's such a big one. We hear that a lot. Just give you all 30 seconds or so. This is really interesting. 77% say building management and leadership skills so far. Yeah, it makes sense. There's a lot of things you all are juggling. Okay, here we go. There we go. Yeah, so we have a big chunk in the top one here. Interesting, actually, that we've got quite a few, 23% around developing a common language around management. This is a trend that we're also seeing a lot of, which we're really, really glad for, because this is like a big piece of the work we end up doing with Elevators to help companies do that. And I know with Learnably as well, in the work that Susie does. 60% developing talent internally. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. All right. Thank you so much for filling that out. That's really helpful. So the next part, what really can we do then about this? What can we do? What are some examples of next generation initiatives that people can use? Before we dive into that, though, I'd love to talk about what really drives the success here. What are the new criteria for the modern approach? Because I think before we like dig into things that we can actually do, what does the criteria look like here that we need to talk about before we start diving in and designing new initiatives for our team? Some of you I know are trying to look for things where we're designing new initiatives on a budget. Others of you I know have got a little bit more cash to spend, but like not as much as in previous years. And so we're always thinking about like, well, how can we really optimize what we do have? So Raj, I'll start with you. What really drives the new criteria for a modern approach to think about, not actually what strategies there are?
Well, I think it's a really a point that Susie made earlier. It's really important to recognize that the shifts in the generational kind of makeup of your teams. I believe the stat is around 30% of the workforce by 2030 are going to be Gen Z or Gen Z in the US, they say. They all have different expectations as well. So you kind of need to ensure that the strategies in your approach are fit for purpose, and I think engagement is one of the ways of actually testing that, not just kind of the typical kind of happy sheets of like, how did you watch this? Yes. And I think moving away from, I think something that I'm particularly very passionate about is the industry has very much fixated, the measure of success has been how many minutes did you watch of this video, and therefore you've actually learned something. But actually those two things cannot be equated, particularly in this era when you literally could have a video running on the side and be getting on with something else. You have no idea if someone's actually absorbed any of those things and actually being able to identify any change in their skills, in their performance, and anything. So I think thinking through your own objectives. Why are you actually running this training, this learning initiative in the first place? What are you hoping to get out, and how will you support the application of the learning afterwards? And for that, which is what's great about the work that you do at Elevate, is the kind of facilitated conversations that happen around the learning to ensure that learning sticks. So I think first and foremost, one criteria is understanding your audience, being clear on what success looks like. So engagement, like, are people engaging, is important, but then thinking at the outcomes afterwards, which, like, what's the behavior change that I want to see as a result of this? Is it, and actually looking at that on a more longitudinal perspective. It's not just you've done it, therefore you've miraculously transformed. It's actually the check-ins 3, 6, 12 months later. It's how you weave it into the developmental conversations with the managers, the one-to-ones that you're having, to really support the employees to actually on that upskilling journey that they're on, because it actually is a journey. It's not just a one and done kind of intervention that you've done with your team.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And Cynthia says here, measuring success really needs to be like a multiple step approach. Exactly as you say, adoption is step one, but it can't be like the final metric of success. Yeah, absolutely true. Susie.
Yeah, I was just thinking of a couple things as you're sparking thoughts with me. And one of the, here, I'll throw out another fun fact, that there's so many different stats around this, but like we can all agree that the general workforce globally is more disengaged than ever, right? I think, like one of the latest ones I've heard is like 40% of individuals, this is from McKinsey, are looking at leaving their job in the next 3 to 6 months, right? So that's a lot. It's like 1 in 2 people are thinking of quitting when they start. Like day one. So you're thinking, okay, so we're working on developing them. They're already thinking about leaving. So like, I think a part of this has to be like the bigger picture of like thinking like, how do you keep people motivated and how do you connect people at work? There's some other work that I'm doing with an expert who works in workplace connections. And he said on average, everyone has like 2 or 3 connections on work now at work. And so like if you drew like a spider graph or something, like it would just be like this like little blob of lines and then another little blob of lines, right? And like previously it used to be like stars, right? Like that there's a lot of cross-pollination. So I think that if we want to look at like what, where I think this will continue to evolve as we continue to actually be more thoughtful about working in a hybrid environment, it was kind of a lift and dump. Like it was urgency. We had to move to this model. So I think in addition to all of the rational points like that Raj went through and that are so meaningful from a learning perspective, it's like, how do you keep people here? How do they get the old points out of learning where we would get to meet people across the entire organization, like doing more of that. So the cross-pollination, connections, motivation, retention.
And just building on that, there's 2 very specific metrics that we see with our clients. So if they use kind of engagement tools, what they typically would do is they'll get baseline data on the personal growth driver of employee engagement. And there's a question that gets asked, I feel that I'm developing professionally at work, and they'll use that as a metric of a before and after and see how much that has increased. And then generally increasing your expectations around engagement in general. As I mentioned early on, in the industry, 10%, 15% if at best. With Learnably and our approach, you'll see 40 to 60% every month. If you really are able to customize the experience and make sure you meet people where they're at, you can create an engaging experience. You're not going to get 100%, literally impossible unless it's mandatory compliance. But where it is more self-directed, you can increase your expectations around regular engagement.
That's an excellent result. Like really, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just goes to show how people do want these individualized journeys. So where you can bring that aspect into designing the L&D initiatives, all the better for sure. So I'm interested in hearing where your L&D initiatives are taking place. Like, where are you? Are you in the office? Are you pulling people together? Are you trying to design things that are more remote? Really interested to see like what you all are thinking at the moment. So I'm gonna launch another one because I'm really interested to see where this is. Oh no, that one says it's already been launched. No, I'm not. Okay, instead of which, pop in the chat box for me. Where do you find your L&D initiatives are taking place? Are you trying to make them in person and live? Are they virtual and live? Are they virtual, not live, so asynchronous? Or are they kind of like coursework related? Would love to see where you're finding these happen. And while we do put those in, virtual and live, mostly virtual, okay, 100% virtual, lots of virtual mainlys. Yeah, this is what I imagine is happening with so many companies around the globe. I know a lot of you, you've got employees in the US and across Europe. Okay, that's really helpful to know that most of you are virtual, async, often embedded. Yes. Okay. Got a couple, Gil, you're face to face, mixture of the above. Great. Okay, well, so let's talk about just-in-time initiatives. I think that's the first one that I want to cover here, because I think that just-in-time concept is really, really key to make sure that we are meeting people where they are. Susie, how would you define just-in-time initiatives? What are some examples that you've seen have worked really well?
Okay, I'll give an example, and this isn't even like a paid plug. This is an honest example. So one time because I work with Elevate, I was working on conflict resolution. And of course, like I'm experienced, I've worked through conflict before, and but I needed it just at that time, and I was meeting with senior people, and I watched just in time an Elevate course, and it was, I think, 6 minutes. And I was like, yes, this could give me a structure. Perfect, I'm off and running, right? So like for me, I probably wouldn't, like, it's just like all the time there's things changing in HR in the world, and they're like, oh, you should learn about, like, I don't know, compensation, but you're not going to learn about it until transparency law comes through or something, and you are forced by a law to do it. So I feel like there's a lot of just changing landscape things that, like, or whatever you're doing in your job, it's so good to just have qualified resources to source from. So just-in-time learning, that was an example for me, but I do it myself by having qualified providers like McKinsey I mentioned, or Deloitte. I would go to Gallup, Gartner. Like those are all like really good providers of information, and they're free, like on LinkedIn. So I think that just having I don't know, a list of go-to people and following them is helpful. You can learn just in like snippets.
Yes. Okay. Love those. And also as resources, you're right. There are some resources out there which are free, and they're great, and they do pull a lot of data together. Raj, what do you see? How would you define just-in-time initiatives, and what are some examples that you've seen work well?
Yeah, so just building on Susie's point, I think one of the roles that we play at Learnably is around the curation, because there's so much content out there. How do you know what
Yeah.
good really looks like? 40%
Yeah.
of the content on our marketplace is actually free, but I think it's deciphering what good actually looks like. And so part of our role as a platform is the kind of curation, which is through our experts, through AI, through the community, and through the social learning aspects that we've got on the platform. One thing that we've done historically, and that I've spoken to other companies about, is this concept of empathy guides. So this idea is really understanding your colleagues, and this is particularly useful when it comes to delivering feedback. So if you know you're going to be having a meeting with someone, an empathy guide is basically a guide to yourself, and it's a great initiative as part of onboarding, where you say, okay, this is a little about me, these are my quirks, this is when I take lunch, this is how I like to receive feedback. This could be instant, in real time, in person, or on chat. I'd rather wait until we have our one-to-one. I'd rather you give it in writing or give it verbally. So things like that, just really understand your colleagues. And it goes back to this point I made earlier about empathy in the first place, which can be so hard in a remote or hybrid world, particularly if you've never met these colleagues. How do you understand? If you want to meet them where they're at, you need to understand them better. Now, obviously, the ideal situation would be trying to spend time with them in real life, in person, but that's not always going to be possible. We've got people on this webinar with teams in like 14 plus countries. Not always possible. So one thing is obviously access to curated high quality content, really understanding your peers kind of better. And then what also something we facilitate on Learnably is around this piece around social learning, where you can understand what are your colleagues learning in real time right now. So that could be through an activity feed on the platform. It could be through a Slack integration that we have, where okay, Lucy's just bought this book. And obviously the employee is empowered to decide to share or not share. But as a platform, we try and encourage sharing, because when you are hybrid or remote, you're not overhearing a conversation that, oh, I'm going to this conference, or I'm just reading this thing right now. And so everything that we can do to facilitate social learning through the different features we have really helps create that kind of culture of learning, which is so important in a hybrid world.
I really like those points. And I think, having a plan, You have a plan, right? Like it's curated content and it's there when you need it because you already had a plan. And this is something I think that really should be a highlight, like for someone who's listening to take away. You have to be thoughtful about how you're going to approach it. So the resources are there when you need them, right? Follow Raj, like Raj knows what he's talking about, right? And learnably and use them as a resource. I feel this is where a lot of people like fall down because they just try to learn things like from wherever. And there's a lot of resources that are not going to be as helpful or may misguide you, right? Depending on if you haven't researched them, know if you're aligned with how they work, if they align with your culture at work, etc. So
Yeah.
yeah, really, I appreciate those points.
Yeah. And in the US, I don't know if any of you have heard of Claire Hughes Johnson, who used to be the COO at Stripe. She actually, it was her one of these really, they call her working with me doc, but I think Raj's point is that it's just a little bit, you index more towards the pieces about you more in there. Hers is quite thorough, and it was made very famous because Elad Gil put it in his book, The High Growth Handbook. So if any of you want to find a copy, even if you just Google it, Claire Hughes Johnson's Working with Me doc, you'll find it. And that will give you a good like structure to start with, and then you can go from there and add things in. And I think in terms of making this like a strategy for L&D initiatives, I think it's really helpful that L&D teams encourage all their managers to write one. It really helps, not just yourself in that's on the call, but making it part of a manager training to in the first instance to get people to write that to start off with and share that with their teams, I think is incredibly useful. So the other piece that I want to really dig into, I think the other strategy is obviously this shift we've seen from moving from this classroom style of learning to more of a read or watch content in advance and then come together as a group to discuss, or as we say, social learning. And I know we've got lots of good examples of social learning, but I'd love to hear from Susie first off. Like, let us know, what have you seen that works on the social learning side?
I see a lot of social learning, and I see, the digital nomad nature of it. I give the example of my kids that, right now, this is how I think learning is changing. I have a 9-year-old. He came to me last week with like something that he spelt out like a sentence and like with all the punctuation. I was like, you need a comma here. You're missing it. He's like, no, I don't. And I was like, no, I was like, I actually think you do, because like unless English has changed. Then he Googled it. Then he's like, oh yeah, you're right. And I was like, thanks. But like, this is what it's like. I was like, this is exactly what it's like right now everywhere, because, it's digital nomads. You have it in your hand. So it's just the thought process I see my kids go through. I see people who are at work go through it, right? Where they're looking for that validation. So I think the social learning is like, yeah, people want to hear, they want to fact check, they want to see what other people are saying. We were talking earlier with Lucy and Raj separately, like just about, how this is rolling out. And I think Raj has really interesting perspectives on this. And he has tackled this on a very professional level, right? From my perspective, I see like you have to use it at the right time. Right. If like social learning from others is good for like bouncing ideas on certain subjects. And again, like if it's thoughtful and planned, that it makes sense to do. Otherwise, you could be doing the wrong topic with the wrong people. And I've seen that, like where, you're talking about like, let's say, belonging, like I would never argue that belonging is not important. Of course it is, right? But is it the right time to talk about it, right? Like, should you be talking about this with the senior people in an organization for an hour together? Probably not, unless there's something you're trying to solve, right? So the social learning, I think it's there. It's just finding, problems to solve and matching it with your business day to day versus hitting like big headline topics. Because I think there's a lot of that. And especially if you're from HR, it's everything you're reading and hearing about. You trying to incorporate into work, into social learning. I'm seeing that, but it's a misfit, right? It then messes up perceptions of certain topics. So anyways, those are my 2 cents of what I'm seeing now.
Great. Raj, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so when we talk about social learning at Learnably, we're really looking at how you facilitate people to learn kind of from each other, be inspired from each other, and to kind of create that culture of learning in a hybrid or remote world. And so the way that manifests, I mentioned a few of them before, which is through a Slack integration, through an activity feed, but also we have things like playlists on the platform. So it's a bit like Spotify, where you can have subject matter experts, or actually anyone in the organization can actually curate a playlist of like, here's a book, here's an article, here's a video. You might want to follow this too. You can either have human created playlist, or you have an AI generated playlist, but actually the playlist created by the internal subject matter experts or even just peers and colleagues get the most engagement, because people want to know what other people are learning. Like, you want to kind of know what your manager's learning right now, and actually, why wouldn't you share that, right? Because actually that's if people want to aspire to have that role in the future, it's important to kind of democratize that access. The other thing we have is kind of a level of curation and reviews over and above Amazon. So on the platform, you can see reviews left by your colleagues on the different learnings that they've kind of accessed, which gives you that extra level of kind of comfort. And very, tangibly, to give you an example of how the Slack integration works. So in our own company, I had seen someone had bought the book Atomic Habits. That went out on Slack, that this colleague has bought Atomic Habits. 5 other people, actually, including myself, then bought Atomic Habits. And then you end up creating like a virtual book club on the back of that, where you can discuss takeaways, have you implemented any of these things? And so for me, social learning is about how you create a culture of learning remotely, get inspired by your colleagues, and facilitate those kind of discussions that may have happened in person if you happen to sit next to them and happen to know that they were doing this thing or going. And I think that's particularly important for the newer, the younger generations and the people entering the workforce now, because they don't have the opportunities to learn through osmosis. You have to be more intentional about how they learn. And I think historically, there's been this issue of proximity bias around development, where it's the people that are closest to their manager physically, or they're getting that face time. Social learning means that everyone has that kind of baseline and support to elevate themselves, so to speak, and actually upskill themselves and be inspired by the people around them when you're not physically around them, so to speak.
Raj, that's so interesting, because there's so many like examples made in terms of like inclusion, and one of them is actually around a playlist. Creating a playlist with everyone is like an example of diversity and inclusion, because everybody likes different music and can put it all together. And as I was thinking about it, it's like maybe the social learning is really about inclusion, because it's not about being hierarchical, and actually it's like busts through all of the layers in your organization. So you'll hear like senior leaders are like, oh, I'm so disconnected like with the front line. So this is actually a great opportunity, like with the social learning, like to break those barriers down, right? And also to make people's voices heard in a different way. So I think that's a major plus. I've never thought about like this, because you used that example. I was like, yes.
And just to build on that, it's one of the reasons we don't restrict playlists to just HR, because often HR ends up being a bottleneck in organizations, and they cannot be the subject matter experts in everything. So actually democratizing playlist creation to anyone, even the intern can create a playlist if they have something to share, is really about, as I said, that democratization and creating a more inclusive approach, for sure.
Love that. Yes, that's really fantastic. Yeah, that is really, really fantastic, because it just means that people can follow what's been going on. We've actually used, funnily enough, like something similar in a redesign that we're doing for a company, where they have the Elevate videos as and then people like senior leaders or whoever wants goes in and creates the playlist that they want, and then people +1 or add into it, and they self-form cohorts on different manager playlists that they want to learn from, and then they choose 7 or 6 rather out of like a long list, and then that's like 6 months. That's like a 6-month program, and those cohorts can get together because they know they want to learn these things in this order that they're particularly interested in, and anybody can +1 and join the cohort. And then they meet up together and do group coaching sessions where they watch the class in advance, come back together to do group coaching and talk about, well, how do we really implement that learning into our day-to-day at this particular company within this particular culture. And that works really nicely. I think other examples that we're seeing of social learning our end is to incorporate more ways of participating with the audience slightly differently. So with one client, instead of us coming in and doing a workshop where we're delivering management training content in a certain way, we're actually recruiting 3 of their senior leaders from like engineering and ops and across the board and research. And we're prepping them in advance. Like you have to hit on these like 4 really important bullet points when it comes to how to run a one-on-one correctly. And then these 4 really important bullet points when it comes to how to delegate correctly or delegate really well. And then instead of our facilitator actually delivering the content with slides, our facilitator is moderating a panel discussion on the topic where they hit upon those things. And then it really engages the audience. They're hearing from people within the company. So I think there are also some really cool things around this social learning piece that where you can sort of call on ambassadors within the company to do a lot more.
Yeah, I like this. I'm like writing notes. I'm like connecting dots myself here. Like it's like, you know, the social learning, it broadens the connections and it leads to momentum, right? It
Yeah.
really, you know, and that's the piece that it's like, how do you, again, think about how you plan that out in the organization and let people actually get the, I guess, the license to go out and drive that momentum and track and get things done. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's this idea that Raj was talking about before we hopped in today of this multi-modality learning, where the more we can use different modes of learning, the more engaging, the more personalized it can be, the more people feel like they have a sense of agency over their own learning journey, I think. And when we're offering these and by the way, these are not expensive options, you know, creating this book club, creating Slack learning channels, writing empathy guides, bringing in exec team members or senior leaders to help with panel discussions to embed some of the learning. These are things you can do these for free almost. You know, these are things that you can really incorporate into your into your programming that bring it to life, make it different and new.
You could even build that into your onboarding. Like if you think about from an HR perspective, like you could ask like, uh, we used to have like, oh my God, what's the Will Smith movie where he does it with his son? Does anybody know? Like the purpose, man, what's that called? Anyways, like this movie was like the #1 favorite. Yes, Pursuit of Happiness. Thank you. I worked at a company where we collected everybody's favorite movie, and I was like 80% of people, this was on their list. I was like, what? I was like, I have to actually go rewatch this because like it was like the #1. You're like, it is actually a really good movie. And anyways, the point being that like in your HR systems or in your onboarding modules, you can ask these type of questions. And if you use a system like HiBob, I don't know if anybody uses that here, they actually can regroup in all these different ways that you've talked about social connection, and you could actually see it like just instantly. So I think there's so many technology solutions that people have at their companies that can facilitate this too and kind of bring it all together pretty easily. So
yeah, love those. Raj, do you have anything that you're going to add on this topic?
I think not necessarily specifically on social learning, but I think what we do as a company to facilitate learning. So one of the biggest barriers to learning is time and making the time. Now, I think that there's something around prioritization because you can make the time for it. But in order to really take that off the table, what we do as a company is we actually offer unlimited learning leave. So you are learning, if you want to learn something, you can literally request time off for it. And we want to kind of make it so it's not taboo to request that. And so people across the organization, from leadership, myself, I'll take learning leave as well. As a learning and development company, you'd expect us to kind of practice what we preach. And so that's something we do. But it doesn't have to be in as extreme as unlimited. You can literally carve out time for people to block off. It could be as a ritual. So it could be like a day a month. It could be a certain amount of time a week. You can just create the rituals that work for your organization, but actually giving people that permission to learn and giving them that confidence that they can learn, they should share what they're doing, I think is really helpful in creating a culture of learning.
Yeah, actually Manulife does Fuel Up Fridays, and everybody has license like in the afternoon or even in the morning to take one or the both off, like to learn. So I think that's pretty cool. I love that unlimited learning leave. What did you learn about on your leave?
So I've recently been, as you'd expect me, taking some AI kind of courses and AI in the world of work within the kind of people practices, and also, you know, whether it's attending kind of conferences and things as well.
Yeah, very cool.
Amazing. Well, so we've talked about so far just in time initiatives to make sure we're like in that flow of work, you know, things like performance review seasons coming up, like what can we really put like right now, which people are going to need timely and useful. We've talked all about social learning and ways that we can bring groups together in a way that's different from this kind of seminar style. We're bringing groups together, leveraging other folks on the team. We're bringing people together for discussions. People are watching things or reading things, listening to things in advance, and then coming together to really talk about how they can implement it into their day-to-day and learn from strategies from other people. We've talked about this like multimodality learning as well, these remote book clubs, Slack channels, all these kind of good things, learning leave, empathy guides as well from Raj, which I love. And I'd love to hear from you all actually as well. So there's quite a few things you've mentioned, but I'm sure there's some people that are doing some cool stuff in their companies right now and thinking about how can I make that budget stretch? How can I really engage a workforce that is quite different from the one that I was helping 5 years ago? So please do pop in the chat box. And for those of you who are like scribbling and taking notes, hopefully we'll get some new things that we can add to this. I'd love to hear the kinds of things that you all do to help upskill your workforce. Hackathons, Louise, yes, amazing idea. That is such a great one. And I think it's often been reserved, hackathons, for the engineers, but actually you can get some great work done in hackathons with non-engineers. It doesn't have to be about building product. It can be about building new systems and processes, new lines of communication, building new programs, all kinds of things. Love that. Is anyone else doing anything that's we have various Maggie, thank you, various sections in our L&D platform. Every month we launch a learning pack. That's great. Well, that really, the November was Personal Effectiveness Month. That's really cool. Have different learning packs so people, it's not, I like that idea because often we need to really curate things. Whilst we want people to have their individualized journey, when stuff isn't curated, that's quite hard because people are like, oh, I could go anywhere. It's to Susie's point earlier. It's a bit like, you don't have to watch everything all at once. Like pick the things that are really relevant just in time that you're all learning together. Amazing. Chandy, thank you. We're getting the team members to each others in groups. So teach yourself talent series. Amazing. Yep. Laurie, gathering our managers every 6 weeks, 10-minute CEO update, 20-minute learning, 15-minute breakout, 10-minute debrief. Oh, I love that. It's like keeping things like short, keeping things varied, keeping things like fresh. Really nice. That is such a great idea. Really amazing.
That Shandy one, we used to do that too. Sorry, we called it like the leader beat. And we'd also bring external focus. So it's like CEO, external focus, and then a learning piece. Just as a different idea. People love to have curated external stuff that's good, that just pops up. It's always brings so much more credibility.
Amazing. So I'd love to get into just a last 10 minutes of Q&A. Before we do, while you're doing that, I do just want to run just one final poll, if I can make it work. And if I can't, I'm going to put a link in the chat box. One final poll here. Hold on, let me just bring it up. Okay. Okay, I don't know if we can see that. No, we can't. Okay, I'm going to ditch that and we're going to put this link in here. All right, hold on a minute while I get it to everybody, not just myself. Here we go. Okay, if everyone wouldn't mind clicking the link there. If you'd like to submit questions, we're going to take them in just a second. Please do in the Q&A box. But while you're doing that, you know, at Elevate, we are really passionate about training managers and executives because we really believe that who you work for is everything. And management is very much a learned skill, as we know. And we partner with companies like Learnably to really upskill their teams through individual and group coaching, live facilitated trainings, and scaled on-demand micro-learning. So the link here will just let us know if you'd like us to follow up with you about any of the things that you've heard today in the webinar. I'd also just want to let Raj take a second to share a little bit more about Learnably and what they're doing currently as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Lucy. So as I mentioned earlier, at Learnably, we recognize that people learn very differently. We're really passionate about creating an inclusive approach to learning, meeting people where they're at. And so rather than you being beholden to one generic e-learning vendor, we bring you a curated marketplace of over 200 different providers where you're only paying for the content people are actually using. So you equip people and empower them with a stipend, either at an individual basis or a team or essential level. And then people can choose from books, coaching, courses, conferences, e-learning, work with great providers like Elevate as well. And you really are able to meet them where they're at. There's a whole bunch of social tools where you can see what your colleagues are learning. And it means that your engineers can get access to very best engineering content. Your marketeers get access to very marketing content from over 200 different providers, all in one place. So if that's of interest, we'd love to kind of continue the conversation. And obviously, we love partnering with Elevate.
Amazing. So we have one question in our Q&A thing here, which is, how have you been able to push forward modern L&D initiatives where there is resistance from higher ups who don't understand learning to be more than just training? And maybe this comes into the kind of the how part of the design, like how do we really implement these effectively and get buy-in from more senior folks? And Susie, I'll give this one to you.
I think there's a lot of change management, we could talk about. One thing I will say that I felt like in my heart I should have mentioned in the call is that I think you need to change so that to make people more aware of all the learning they're doing on their job. Like this is the first place to start, before you start trying to get all these different things and building out cases for things. Like everyone on this call, anyone in any job, I would argue you're learning a lot on the job. So, but to appreciate that. So like I used to make it like an hour of every week that I would reflect on, like, what did I do last week and what did the team do? And then kind of develop it like an email, like, this is amazing. Or in the morning shout out on Monday, hey, you know what? Like Lucy's amazing. She just did these 25 things, in this other area that she doesn't normally work in. Like, that's awesome. And then they'll be like, yeah, that is awesome. And then you're reminded because you're on the bullet train of work, of all these other things in the bigger picture of what you're actually doing. So that I think is your first stop. Like you start there with making people how aware of like what they're doing. And then you look at from there to make the case, like what else would they need, right? Like they've already leveled up. Now they're working in different areas. Like, hey, did you know, like the people in my team have actually tripled their, throughput and are working in 3 different areas. I think now since they're working in this area, they need this training, right? So it all becomes like a business need. Anyways, that's just like one example. I hope that helped. You can chat and I can write you back if you want. If you want a different one. So yeah, Raj.
Yeah, I would just say start small. If you don't have the buy-in from your leadership team, well, firstly, I love the point Susan's making. Just help people recognize they are learning all the time and kind of reflect that. But find your kind of internal champions. Start a pilot, show that there is the demand, there is the interest. What's really fascinating with when we launch with clients, we've had clients say, this is the thing that's had the most engagement of any people tool that we ever launched. And then people start sharing it on social media. There's nothing better. Like we launched with Flutter, which is a public company, so it's a larger company, but the CEO got wind of what we were doing, and then he was saying, like, when are we giving this out to the rest of the wider group? But that only happened because he spotted the excitement from the employees to the extent where the employees were posting on LinkedIn, on social tools, like, I love this thing. This is what I've just got. This is what I've just bought with Learnably. This is what I've done. And so you can start small and you can get your employees to demonstrate their excitement, and then that will bubble up. Because at the end of the day, what does the CEO, what does the management care about? They care about retaining and attracting top talent. And if you can demonstrate you've given something to your employees that people are actually going to use and they love, then I'm sure you can make the case for it. So start small, get your champions, get the kind of influencers within the business, get them talking about it. And then what you'll find is other people will be like, oh, why don't we have this? And then there'll be a bottom-up kind of movement. If you don't have the buy-in to just launch something from day one across the whole organization.
Yeah, that's a really great one. And I love that because it's just showing that we've got like these champions that can really make change and that everybody can make change, and the CEOs will see that. And I think also what we found is that when you can sort of put into your L&D programs some parts which are free, which are inexpensive, which are engaging, people do really love that. CEOs really love that too. A lot of CEOs are really, I coach them all day long. They're worried. A lot of industries are very strapped for cash right now. There's been a lot of layoffs over the last year, but it doesn't mean that they don't care. They just need you to help pitch it to them in a way that really helps show the ROI, that shows you've done your homework in terms of what your managers really want. and that you've got like data from that when you actually asked them, and that you can show that there is excitement and engagement around it too. So I think if you haven't rolled out something massive and you want to sort of show that excitement and engagement, to Raj and Susie's point, even just like running a little pilot to start and seeing the kind of feedback that you get can go a really long way to dispel some of that resistance from your executive team. I love this question as well, from Erica here. What do you think is the long-term future for company-wide large learning programs? Are they over? Yes. Is the future all custom and individual? Either of you, Raj?
I would say so. I think there's, you know, in the world of compliance, you will always need that. And that's not an area we necessarily kind of cover. But I think particularly with the rise of AI, you just can't get away from it. Like, and there's no excuse to not make it a more customized kind of experience. I'll give a shout out. We've just launched a white paper around learning maturity models. And our research has found that 20% of companies are going to be implementing AI into their learning programs in the next 12 months. Obviously, a lot of vendors and platforms like ourselves having it, but you know, these companies directly are going to be using AI in how they kind of operate. And I think there is no excuse now not to hyper-personalize. So compliance, yes, you need everyone just doing the same thing. For kind of management training as well, I think you'll have cohorts that will do the same learning, but I do not believe the entire organization, the entire population will all do the same thing. I just don't think there's any need to do that in this era where people have different needs.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think maybe you teach everybody the same thing, like compliance is like, yeah, you're right. That's going to be there. But I'm thinking something like quality programs like Six Sigma or Lean or like whatever, if you have an ISO certification, that type of thing as well. I think everybody will learn it, you know what I mean? But the modalities will be different. Like gone are the days of like presentation style, right? Or kind of boot camps. You know, it's kind of sad in my heart because I've done a lot of those where it's so nice, where it's like a celebration. Maybe they'll go with like premier kind of, you know, like if you're like certain like high potentials, you go to like Hawaii and do a certain training. I think that will happen because there'll be different creative ways of retention and making people feel special as they get stretched and grow at work.
And just one thing I want to say on that is please don't fall into the trap of making assumptions about your people. So because we work with entire organizations, I think there's an assumption that the engineering team will always want e-learning. But actually what our data shows is that when you give them the option, the engineers love books, like physical books that they purchase through Learnably. So don't make any assumptions on behalf of your employees. Give them that choice and then see what they gravitate towards.
Yes. Choice. It's what everybody loves nowadays. We don't just like being told what to do. Yes, giving them options. I love that. Okay, so as we kind of bring our session to a close, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Raj, Susie, special thanks, obviously, and also to all of your amazing audience participation. We've loved all your thoughts and your ideas and your questions, and we really hope that this has been helpful to you. We will send you the recording in an email. It'll go to everybody that signed up. You will also get links to the white paper that Raj mentioned too. Let us know if we can be of any further assistance with what you're looking at programming wise for your companies. And we will hopefully see you on the next webinar in April, which is going to be a treat. More on that to come. So thank you very much. Good to see you.